Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Stephanie Ng, the founder of Hong Kong-based charity Body Banter, which aims to create opportunities for young people to have conversations about body image and mental health. Born in Canada and raised in Hong Kong, the mental health advocate talks to us about body image and how the diet culture in Asia impacts mental health. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. With me this week is Hong Kong mental health advocate. So excited to have you with us, Steph. Welcome to Proudly Asian.
Yay, Isabel. I've been so excited for this day and this episode, so it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm definitely very excited to talk about the topic that we are about to go through because since the start of Proudly Asian, we haven't really got the chance to talk about Asian body image. Partly it's because I haven't come across someone who would have expert insights or who would feel as passionate as you are. I'm definitely very, very excited about this conversation that we're about to have. But before we delve into all the topics that we're about to go through this episode, I think our listeners would like to know a little bit more about you, about your background. So why don't we start with you telling us about yourself? Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up?
What a great question and a great way to begin. So I'm Steph. I was born in Canada, but raised in Hong Kong. So I always like to say that I was, birthed and then brought back. So I was born and then I didn't really get a chance to stay in Canada before I was scooted back. Grew up here, went to school here until I was 18, and then went abroad for my undergraduate and master's degrees before being scooted back again because of COVID, and then started my PhD in Hong Kong recently. So I've been all over the place and really enjoyed it. I think it kind of contributes to my fluid storyline in many ways. And looking back, I think it kind of sets me up to be someone who kind of just likes to move around. I think when you asked me, what are you? And who are you? I kind of had a moment of reflection and it was like, who am I? What am I?
Exactly.
And I think a lot of times instinctually, we like to start with our professions and those kinds of details. But actually, I think what I'm going to say here is that at heart, I am a very mischievous and awkward child, internal child, who has learned over time to really embrace especially those parts of myself. That's my reflection on what am I?
I know that you have been a very active and passionate mental health advocate. I just want to know how you got started with this kind of work. At what point in your life you decided that this is something that I want to do?
Whenever I think about the moment I started to really see mental health as a priority, and it became really my line of work in many ways, is I like to go back to the statement, my mess is my message. And this was a statement that one of my good friends shared with me. I don't know who I'm quoting. So if you said this, you're a genius. But it's become really very much my mantra of life. And I always like to think about, I do this work because of personal experience, and it really makes this work especially meaningful to me. So we'll talk more about this later, but I had my own bout of experiences with mental illness in my teens. And I think, as through the journey of recovering, of learning throughout that process, I've learned to not just embrace those messier parts of myself, but also as I've been able to put words to these complex experiences and really abstract, messy things that have happened in my life story, I've also been able to connect with other people because we all have those pieces of ourselves, just like we were talking about in the introduction. I think about it or I visualize it as a sky filled with balloons. And at any given point when we're introducing ourselves to other people, we're just pulling from different parts of that sky full of balloons. And whenever we're presenting ourselves in any context, we have to curate that storyline. So everyone has a mess, everyone has a sky of balloons, and we're just making sense of it together. So I think my experiences, my past experiences, have really taught me that we can connect with each other on the level of struggle and strength, and make a solid space out of that.
Let's talk about some of the balloons that would define you.
That's great.
You're currently pursuing your PhD, and you're also the founder of this Hong Kong-based recognized charity Body Banter. Can you tell us a little bit more about Body Banter, how it all started? What do you hope to achieve with the organization?
Yeah, so Body Banter, the idea for it, I still distinctly remember the moment that it came to my head. It was during a summer break back in 2016, and I was sleeping, and I had a dream that I was standing on a stage and delivering a talk. And as I was giving this talk, suddenly out of my mouth came like all of these pieces of things that weren't words, and they were just this whole mess of stuff, like baggage. And I remember in that moment in my dream feeling like, oh my gosh, the audience is going to judge me so hard. I've just spewed miscellaneous objects. And I remember then looking horrified at the audience and then actually in reality receiving applause from them. So the message that I got from the dream was, we carry a lot of baggage with us, a lot of stories and messy stories. But there is, a connection there. People resonate with it more than they may criticize or judge it. So that was the moment where I kind of came up with the idea of Body Banter, more so gave me the courage and the curiosity really to start something where I was going to start a conversation with other people in the community. So we started out really basic, was really just a website where I invited friends and friends of friends to share their experiences with body image and mental health. And that was the whole theme of it, just wanting to listen to other people's experiences surrounding my own experience of those kinds of struggles and those particular pieces of my story. I wanted to hear more voices to see what that would sound like for me. Just, hey, what did you experience when it comes to this concept? I wanted to know that I wasn't alone. So for, starting out from there was really to feed my own curiosity, so to speak. And then afterwards, it started to grow from there. People started to talk, around my circles. I started to really take language and vocabulary from the things that they were sharing with me, found out that I really wasn't alone. Many people had heard critical comments about their bodies, for example, or had struggled to accept the ways that their bodies felt and looked. So I started to gain some confidence there. Then in my third year of college, I started a group within my school, a discussion group in my college. And there we really started to have more in-person conversations. And I really started to just figure out and realize that power of these in-person spaces where people were being vulnerable. And that was the beginning of those in-person discussion groups that started to blossom around different schools in our area and within the US space. So other schools and students began to notice that, oh, this is an interesting group doing stuff, because we would post on social media. And so it really started out as a school network. Then, unfortunately, when I found myself back in Hong Kong during my master's degree during COVID, that was a really interesting turning point for us as well, because it gave me the chance to work with, one of my collaborators at the time, Natalie, and she's a really special person to me. She was actually one of our a volunteer before, but then she hopped on board, and we established Body Banter as a nonprofit here, a nonprofit organization, and then we started doing more things within the Hong Kong community. And then from there, working with schools, really refining our ambassador program, where we work with 15 to 25-year-olds and we mentor them to start advocacy projects, things like podcasts and webinars and blogs. So whatever creative medium feels most aligned with them. And they create these ways to stimulate conversation. Those are what advocacy projects are. And really the purpose of that is to help them see that their voice matters. that when they can put words to their experiences, it's self-empowering for them to understand and unpack, to see those balloons in their sky, as well as to connect with other people on that level, to say, hey, I see you, you see me, and there's a connection there. So, and we know that, social support and community building is fantastic, and one of the most, it's a huge kind of beneficial aspect of or predictor of good mental health. So that's what we do in a nutshell.
Just a quick follow-up question about body banter and the work that you do in terms of building community, right? Especially with the Asian context, because now you operate in Hong Kong. So when you're trying to spread the awareness and the message about body image in Hong Kong, like how do people react? Are they like scared? Are they like, what are you talking about? How do they react?
That is a brilliant question, and also something that I think my assumptions didn't match what was on the ground, because I think a lot of the Western literature, that comes out of, and not to say that this isn't valuable information. It's more to say that Chinese cultures, or Asian collectivistic cultures, are usually framed as emotionally suppressed, or that we don't really like to talk about these sensitive issues and the like. So that's the way that it's framed. But what I realize is the case is that these conversations around body image, mental health, they're already happening. It's just that people don't necessarily feel like they can find the space to do that in a more kind of regular or normalized setting. So I see this from the work with Body Banter, where our youth ambassadors will come in, and when we do provide that safe space, people have plenty to say. In fact, so much to say that we will run overtime for most of the conversations we have. They might stumble over their words. They might have awkward silences. They might say, I don't know what I'm talking about, but they have plenty to say. And I find that as we give that space to people, we give them other examples of people who are working through these storylines and ideas themselves. So building that community, you find that people start to be like, oh, actually, that's pretty messy, but so is theirs, and there is a beautiful solidarity there. So I think just because it might not happen so much in, let's say, the media, or we don't see it happening in our daily lives, doesn't mean that there isn't, with the work for Body Banter, it's more about creating those pockets of safe spaces, more of these pockets of safe spaces, so people don't feel bad or ashamed of having messy things to say. It's a beautiful piece of mess.
Yeah.
That's what I would really want to emphasize there too.
People always think that, maybe I shouldn't say anything because if I don't know what I'm saying. But then the work that you do, it's kind of similar to the work with Proudly Asian. We're also trying to encourage people, like, even if you don't know, it's okay to say.
Right.
Because if you don't ask, you never know. If you don't ask, is this okay if I say this or if I think of it this way? So it's essentially creating that safe space for people to get comfortable about not knowing, which is very important.
Love that.
Yeah.
So great.
And let's talk about Asian body image and diet culture. It's a lot to unpack there.
I'm ready with my toolbox.
So, let's start off with raising awareness about the existing expectations in Asia. From your experience, from all the conversations that you've had with your global community, what are some of the most common expectations about one's body figure with the Asian context? And do you know where do they come from?
Wow. I'm going to start off with the research and the understandings that I've gathered, and then would also just love to hear your thoughts about your experiences of what you've seen, because I think every person's experience or what they've seen or perceived, specifically within their family settings, not just within the broader context, is actually surprisingly unique to each person. So I'll give you an example of what I've learned from some of the research I did with Chinese young adult women back in the day in my master's and undergrad years, where I was just looking into this particular issue of the food and body concerns of Chinese young adult women. And what I found in that population was that there was this overarching set of conflicting expectations, which I think many of our audience members will have experienced phase two, which is the pressure to be thin, to control the body shape, to make sure that you have tight reins over your eating habits, and also the pressure to eat everything that's being put on your plate, because otherwise you're going to offend the person who made the food. And this is a way of showing filial piety, of respect for family members, people within your loved ones. And so we are torn between what I saw in this group of women that I interviewed was that they were so torn between these two ways or these values of theirs. One hand to show up as this disciplined individual, kind of coming into the world as a strong, independent woman. And then also this expectation to still show a lot of care and softness of that gentle feminine side in their family settings of the caregiver. And I think that this really characterizes these broad expectations that women in our culture might be exposed to. But even within those two expectations, there are so many nuances. So some women were saying, even though I perceive these norms of thinness, I'm genetically predisposed to be smaller. So I actually don't experience I don't follow through with actions like dieting, for example. And then some women would say, I feel it so much that I developed a disordered eating, a full-blown eating disorder because I was trying so hard to maintain both value systems. So I think even within those broad overarching cultural categories, people still have these nuanced ways of responding. So that's what I would say about what I've learned in that research, particularly about the most common expectations that I've seen amongst Asian women. And I also think that in Asia, because of the ways that we, especially in Hong Kong, I would say, where there is this very rushed culture, where we're constantly trying to be more efficient with things. And we tie desirable outcomes not just to actually getting there, but getting there fast. So when we think about, what diet culture is basically saying at its core is that your morality, your character as a person is tied to the way that your body looks. So if you're thinner, you're more disciplined, more successful, more awesome. There's everything going for you. I think when we try to think about Hong Kong's productivity culture, it makes sense why diet products sell so well, especially the ones that say lose weight in 30 days, like fit and fab, all the stuff where you see before and after photos of someone who is really struggling to someone who is really, shining and energized. It makes sense why the diet industry it booms so much. And this is across the gender spectrum, I would say, when we have these pre and post representations of people, such as that diet culture will do, that's when we start to see these body image expectations become most prominent, when people start to link their internal traits to how they're being represented.
I haven't really read reports or really study about this topic, but then as you were pointing out, more and more observations just came to mind because these things, having lived in Hong Kong for so long, I just, this is something that we live with. We see every day, and eventually we just stop taking notice of them. But obviously I remember these things would still stand out to me, not just about body image, but also skin tone. When I first moved to Hong Kong full time, I remember walking around one of the drugstores, and then the lady was like, hey, I just came back from my Greece holiday. I had a little bit of tan on me, and then the person was like, whitening. And I was like, oh, are you trying to sell me whitening product? But I paid a fortune to get tanned in Greece. So why would I pay money to buy whitening product to undo that tan? So it was a bit weird to me. And what you just mentioned there about that whole image of you have to be skinny, toned, in order to be considered successful or competent. And I feel like it applies more to women in Asia instead of, men, because you would hear people about oh, you never see a successful man who is skinny or bony.
Absolutely.
So I'm just oh, wow, that's actually very interesting to me. And everything just becomes so subjective And also you mentioned about the advertising with the diet industry, diet products.
Yeah.
Now I kind of remember seeing those really weird commercials where they would feature a slightly chubby lady, and then like people would be pointing at her, talking negative things about her. And then after she gets skinny, like you mentioned, she just shines. So in a way, people, for example, in the Hong Kong market, they are sort of shamed to buy those diet products rather than as a customer. It's a bit weird to think that I'm shamed
Yeah,
to pay for someone's service and products.
absolutely. And I actually think of shame as the key tool that diet culture uses, because when you can, it sounds so bad but when you reflect, that is what diet products and advertisements are doing. When you can make someone feel bad about something, then you essentially can make that person feel motivated to keep latching on to you, and keep using the products in order to chase the actually impossible goal of feeling better. And so when you can keep the person chasing, essentially keeping like a carrot hanging, hanging on a rod, and getting people to chase that carrot perpetually, never actually getting to the place where you get to that, and we'll talk more about this too when I share a bit more about my journey. But when you get to that finish line of whatever weight that they propose you'll be happy at, the outcome of happiness doesn't just land on you, which people expect. People expect that once they look a certain way, all of the privileges that come with thinness, which is exactly what we're actually chasing, the things that are associated with the status of thinness, not thinness itself, which I think is often confused. It's like because we've associated success and happiness and acceptance, fundamentally acceptance of ourselves and acceptance from other people. We associated all of that with thinness. We get there and we're incredibly disappointed because it's not what it's kind of stacked up to be.
That whole programming or engineering people to think that you can always be better. Like now you have lost 10 kilograms. You can always lose more. You can always look better. Now you're thin, but then you need a taller nose. So why don't you go for plastic surgery?
Yeah.
There's always that thinking of like you can be better. And that's what essentially engineers and fuse that whole like beauty industry in Asia, which is sometimes quite unhealthy because that's how they get money, that's how they get business, that's how they keep their customers.
Absolutely.
So, we mentioned about advertising. What about the media? The media in this part of the world, how much of a role does it play in shaping people's perceptions? And do you think also social media worsened the problem as well?
So the way I always like to think about the role of social media is that it is the most it's kind of like the seasoning on top of a food that makes everything explode. That might not be the best metaphor, but it's not the only thing contributing to the food's taste, but it is something that it kind of makes the taste more pronounced. So I'll explain a little bit here. And when it comes to, for the psych nerds out there, what may or may not have heard of the biopsychosocial model, which is just this framework that basically says when we develop any kind of mental health distress, it's always a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors, and never just one thing that bakes the cake, essentially. So, for example, you might have a biological predisposition to be really anxious in the face of stressors. You might have, this tendency that runs through your family, for example, and then a psychological predisposition to have these, really to latch on to a sense of control or structure. And this can be influenced by, let's say, growing up in a very fast-paced society, in combination with those anxious tendencies. And then the social factors might be things like, for me, in my teens, very transitional times, friend groups changing, academic stressors piling on, social media stressors. So again, social media is like the baking powder, if you will, or the yeast in bread. It makes it rise. It adds, it exacerbates, and is the coping strategy for, it makes this kind of these issues more prominent. And it promises us something, a solution perhaps, to the issues that we're experiencing. It's the thing we might, the kind of storyline we will start to latch onto.
Mm-hmm.
So just to flesh that out a little bit more is to say that, for example, you're going through a really hard time with family, with school, with friends, and you're like, I don't know how I can make myself feel safe in this stormy sea. And then social media comes along and says, hey, guess what? If you lost some weight and you got a skinnier body, you're going to feel so good. You're going to feel all of a sudden so accepted. Everyone's going to love you because you're going to look so good. And it's basically this log that floats past in this incredibly stormy sea. It's disgusting. The log is disgusting. It has worms crawling all over it, but it's a log. So you're going to hang on to it because you need to survive. And then you hang on to this log and it keeps you alive. And I think that's what people don't understand so much about with body image and eating disorders, is that it's as imperfect as it is. The reason why it's so resistant to change is because it feels safe and familiar for people. It is potentially the only solution the person can find in their lives at that moment. So I think, just to sum it up, social media exacerbates and creates an imperfect solution to a very messy problem, which is our lives. Or, not to say that it's a problem, so to speak, but it's a perceived problem. And so social media gives us a shortcut to handling that. But as in my own personal recovery and, things that I've learned from people I've worked in research and volunteer settings, is that as people start to understand that the nature of that stormy sea, to know that they can actually swim in that sea, to act in these kind of contextually flexible ways, to make decisions, even though they might not know where they're swimming to, and not so much relying on the log anymore, as people are more able to do that and to recognize their capabilities, really, then social media doesn't become such a big part of that bubble. We stop using it as the yeast. We use something else, like things that we've learned about ourselves, our other coping strategies, other storylines that we've developed over time.
Yeah, there are so many social media filters and also apps where you will be able to make yourself look so skinny in just a matter of seconds. And the very existence of those filters and all those like photo editing apps is also a little bit problematic. It started off with giving convenience for users, but then some people actually take them very seriously and say that I need to look like what the filter would make people look like. And they're just pretty much chasing something that's completely unrealistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I guess there's a bit of that cultural factor that's at play, because one way Hong Kongers or Chinese or even maybe a lot of Asians, the way that they like greeting each other is by saying the other person has gained weight. I don't know if this applies to other East Asian countries, but at least, I'm ethnically Chinese and I know it's true for the Chinese culture, because a lot of people, they have expressed this kind of comment, or even expats who live in Hong Kong, they find it a bit weird, or like, oh, my friend who is a local just gave me a really straightforward greeting or comments like, oh, you got fat. And then they would explain it that this is harmless. This is a friendly way to greet people here. So what's your view on this?
Wow. I love this question, and I've been looking forward to addressing this, actually, because I think there is so much nuance in the ways that I've learned or kind of started to view this particular type of comment in my life. So obviously, I think the first time you ever hear it, or in the context of someone who has experienced body image struggles, eating related struggles, it can feel like an attack, like a real personal attack. Someone saying to you, perpetuating diet culture in your life. And it certainly felt like that for me. I felt very defensive toward it. I was like, why are you so mean? And, if, for example, you've lived in a culture where this isn't the norm, let's say, I lived in the US for many years, and so this wasn't particularly accepted as a greeting. Let's put it there. But as I started to stay in Hong Kong for a little bit longer, and especially in these couple of years, actually, post coming back from COVID and experiencing more of these types of comments, going to gatherings in my adult life, and seeing these comments from a different lens, less so from someone who was very fresh in recovery, and more so from someone who has been looking at diet culture and eating disorders and that literature for a while. I've started to really see that perhaps there's something to do with the ways that we understand language and what it represents for each person. So for our family members, and for the grandmothers and people in the previous generation, I recognize that they don't have the concept of diet culture to even begin from. And a lot of times they will express this purely out of this is the only language available that they have to express care. And it's not to say that the impact is any different. I think for us who are very exposed to different forms of social media, people in our generation of the just people who have been in the more like recent generation of Chinese young adults, being exposed to all of these forms of messaging, we interpret that in so many different ways, and it can hurt so much. But I think my view of creating change and advocating for just more acceptance of conversations about body image and mental health now in my current space is that it's less about fighting back and more about holding a non-judgmental space for people to test ideas, just much like what we do in Body Banter, but maybe in a bit of a different way. Just acknowledging that these people also need to have, for example, grandmothers and people we love who have no malintent of kind of using these comments as poking tools, also need space to test out their ideas. And if the space is available as well, if this person means a lot to us and is open to conversation, it can also be our space to bring it up with them. Like, hey, I know this is not your experience, but the way I interpret it because of my exposure to these kinds of messages in my social media feed, this is how it hits me. And I acknowledge that you don't come from a place of hurtful intention. So that's kind of the way I've started to see these types of comments.
Yeah, a lot of the times when we actually spend some time to understand where everyone's coming from, I think it's one of the most effective solutions to resolve any potential conflicts or misunderstandings. So that's actually very powerful. And I mean, I know that when it comes to body image in recent years, there have been this advocacy with positive body image, embracing the shape that you're born with. And obviously that translates to fashion industry starting to use plus sized models to widen that representation of different body types, because the fashion industry is long accused as one of the worst offender of encouraging unhealthy body image, right? And I find it so interesting because this movement of advocating for plus sized models, characters is not really so well received in Asia, in this part of the world where you still see netizens, people online, for example, in Hong Kong, in East Asia, in South Korea, they still shame people. And I remember seeing this news article that was featuring a plus-sized model in Hong Kong. The comments were so negative and so nasty. And I was like, come on, guys, like this is exactly why we are trying to advocate for plus-sized models, because of people out there who are making nasty comments like that.
Absolutely. It's so hurtful to see people talk about bodies in general like that. And no one deserves that. It just is, I just feel the sentiment of horror as you've been talking about that. And I think that a key issue that I see in terms of the representation of diverse bodies in the Asian context is that we still, even when we put, let's say, larger bodies in a positive light. So let's say we create a TV show where people in larger bodies are celebrated, or we put them as like, oh, like these, larger people can have fun too, which is a framing I've seen in some TV shows where they'll say like, this is a cool thing. And they will separate and say like, let's celebrate people in larger bodies. Let's have plus size models. And while that's great, because we previously didn't even have representation of these people on screen, while that is great, I think that what we need to start to move toward is not separating at all. And that means having people in larger bodies as protagonists in our TV shows, not just as like the stupid sidekick. Which I see a lot of, the clumsy one, the one who always falls over. Absolutely not. Like, we need to stop that. We also need to, when we create these types of shows, and, if I'm going to be honest and say I really don't like beauty pageants, but if we're going to have beauty pageants, I better see a diverse range of bodies just as I would see in everyday life. Like, no one looks like, it doesn't represent the people we see in daily life. The beauty pageant lineup never represents that. And if we're going to have a realistic and, just to celebrate diversity of bodies on screen and to normalize that bodies are meant to be diverse, then we better see a whole array of people, a whole array of skin tones, body shapes, gender identities, like shown on screen. That's what I would just strongly advocate for, instead of whether it be in a positive or negative way, kind of separating or categorizing people who look different as a separate category. That still promotes that narrative of otherness, and that this category is not something we're meant to see on screen, or that there's people who are in larger bodies only fit a certain stereotype or trope. That needs to stop.
And I really hope that businesses are making that decision of widening the representation, not because it's gimmicky or not because it's trending, it's because they are coming from a place of sincerity.
Yes.
But we know there are people who make commercial decisions because this, like maybe plus sized, is trending. But I really hope that eventually that's going to change. And when it comes to on-screen representation, I do want to mention that recently Disney rolled out a female lead character who is a plus-sized ballerina, and when I saw that, I felt so much emotions because it's coming from a personal experience. Because as a kid, I was not skinny. I was a tad chubby, but I also felt that passion of dancing. So I enrolled myself, obviously I begged my mom to enroll myself in a dance class. And I remember after doing that maybe for half a year, we were rehearsing for a certain dance performance. And there was just this one dance move I could not do so naturally. And then the teacher just came over saying that, "Are you too chubby to do this?" And I was so hurt. Very hurt. That stuck with me for many years. And shortly after, I quit dancing because I thought that I was too chubby to dance. I would never be able to do that. I was just not born to do that. And then that eventually influenced my decision of doing volleyball instead. And I lost a lot of weight. And when that came out, I felt so emotional. And I also just wanted to use this episode to maybe tell people that, be careful or be mindful, especially maybe teachers to kids, like be mindful of what you're telling kids, because what you tell them, it's going to stick with them for many years. It's going to influence what life decision they're going to make. It's going to make them think what they can or cannot do.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I just want to tell my younger self or any young people out there, just don't let anyone tell you that you are too XYZ to do a certain thing. Because people who say that, they know nothing about your life, how far you have come, and what you will be capable of. They can't tell the future for you. So don't ever give people that power over your life. You need to own, the life decision, the narrative. You need to really stay anchored, which I know is very, very hard for a kid. But that's just how I felt. That's just reminded me of that dance class experience when I was a kid.
I appreciate you sharing that, and it's such a wonderful anecdote to bring up. I hear you on the emotion came up for me too when you were sharing.
Through the conversations that you've been conducting with Body Banter and the people that you have met, obviously we know that this Asian body image is a very long-standing problem, but is it hopeful that there could be changes coming? Like, do you see this whole cultural expectations, this diet culture in this part of the world, in Hong Kong, in Asia, can be changed eventually?
I am very hopeful. I think that is there is just, even within the space of my work with the young people I work with, there, even if people share with me that they are still struggling with something or grappling with something, let's say a physical characteristic or feeling insecure within their bodies, they're so aware now the narratives that they're being fed. And I think everyone needs to kind of start with this awareness of what's going on. Also kind of make sense of it within themselves. Hey, like, this is what I've been telling myself all along, to unpack that narrative within, to be aware of what's happening, and then slowly start to just move toward a place where they're going to be able to integrate new narratives into their own system. And that is something that many people, and I see the young people creating themselves, because they don't see that in their environment yet, but it's just a yet. And I think, I'm encouraged by these, these representations, like through Disney, for example. Thank you, Disney.
Yes.
And also, we see Aerie, these clothing brands that are starting to show body positivity in a more outward way. And, I really love the song. Oh my gosh, Joyce Chang. Oh my gosh, the song. Go and see something. My brain is not working today.
No
But it's about her becoming just like embracing her body, and Zhang Yi, Joyce Chang doing her part and just sharing that message that it's okay to be in any shape or size. And I just love these conversations that are going, and these small pieces of narrative through different mediums that are starting to influence the young people in our generation.
Definitely sowing the seeds for more fundamental changes in the future. And
Yes.
another very, very important topic that I really want to cover with you is that, when it comes to mental health challenges, a lot of people would think of depression, anxiety, bipolar disorders. But one aspect that's often overlooked is eating disorders. And I would like to definitely ask you about that, and hopefully to spread some positive messages and correct information about this space as well, because not a lot of people understand them, which leads to stigmatization of eating disorders. I've also heard from a friend who has experienced an eating disorder that, someone would come up to her and say, hey, like, you look so skinny, but you have an eating disorder. Does that mean you do like this all the time? That gesture. And that was so traumatizing for her. So
That's terrible.
help our listeners who aren't very familiar with the concept of eating disorders. What does it mean when someone has an eating disorder?
Yeah, so broadly, in a broad sense, having an eating disorder is when a person engages in patterns of behavior of eating that are harmful to their health in psychological, physical, and emotional ways. And importantly, it disrupts their engagement in daily life patterns. So they might socially withdraw, so they might not be able to go into these social gatherings and connect with other people because they're scared of eating in front of people. They're scared of losing control of things that they're eating. So it disrupts their daily patterns. They might not be able to go to work sometimes because they're really tired from not eating enough. So that's when you start to see these patterns starting to interfere with a person's daily life. And that's what we would characterize as a clinical eating disorder. But then just wanted to point out also that subclinical forms of disordered eating, which are patterns of behavior that then contribute to the life impairment later on that characterizes the clinical diagnosis, are equally debilitating in many ways. Because I think these disordered eating patterns are often normalized and therefore missed in the general population. So people will start to engage in, just a diet, or I just skipped a few meals. And these things in and of themselves may not be problematic, so to speak, in different contexts, let's say, but then that feeds into a broader pattern of behavior over time, especially if people start to latch onto narratives that social media feeds us. So meal skipping starts to take on meaning as something that is representative of discipline, for example. So the behavior itself starts to be attached to meaning. And that's when you start to see these patterns of behavior build. I also think that's something to address about eating disorders is that although we typically associate them with physical presentations of symptoms, so someone loses weight, or someone looks really skinny and we think that this is the image of an eating disorder. Fundamentally, it needs to be emphasized that these conditions are psychiatric conditions. They come from these patterns of internal thought patterns of interpretations that exacerbate and perpetuate these types of physical symptoms or behaviors. So when people have that myth, and I know that we might talk about this later as well, with this myth that you can only have an eating disorder when you look a certain way, that is a huge misconception and leads to people not thinking that they're sick enough to seek help, and delays help seeking. So I think it's really important for people to understand that although a lot of eating disorders may present, or some people with eating disorders may present with physical characteristics that indicate their severity of illness. First of all, we should never wait until that stage to seek help. And second, not all eating disorders present with physical characteristic changes. So I think that's important to bring up.
Thank you so much for sharing so much information about eating disorders. And definitely, I think a lot of people, or the majority of people that I've come across, they don't really entirely understand the term eating disorders. And I know that during your teenage years, you also experienced an eating disorder. Would you mind sharing with us about, your experience, your recovery journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, the eating disorder started out as I was saying, like just a diet. I'm just going to try this out, try out different patterns of exercise, of eating, and in and of themselves, I think those patterns of behavior can be very harmless. The issue for me was that then I started to attach it to notions of control, and that is a common theme that characterizes or kind of captures across eating disorders, regardless of which particular diagnosis. There are a couple of them, but usually it's a way to establish control in overwhelming situations. So it slowly started to build a narrative in my head that I was going to, diet and eat in a certain way, exercise in a certain way to establish control. And then those patterns of behavior started to extend, and the claws and the tentacles started to infiltrate into other aspects of my life to the point where it started to really impact my physical, mental, and emotional health. And then when I did, fall to quite a bad place in my health, I found it really hard to seek support. So first of all, it was difficult to find the language for it, because we don't really have that representation of vocabulary or the narratives aren't really, no one who I knew experienced or shared that they had an eating disorder with me. And so I just didn't know what to say. And that goes back to just having a testing ground and way to start to have the conversation. You need to have those messy half sentences of awkward silences to make sense of things. And so that was what I started to do in therapy, with conversations with family members and friends who I'm very grateful, gave me space to do that, and started to put together those experiences and share them. And then that got me into my advocacy work. I leaned a lot on writing to help me understand my experiences. So that's where, all of that also came about. And just to kind of talk about the recovery aspect of my experience is that I never see it quite as a one and done with recovery. And I think with any kind of mental health condition, it's always about taking a stance every day, of commitment to saying, I know my patterns of behavior that didn't work for me in the past. And that's really good information for me to keep kind of knowing that, move forward from it every single day. So when people talk about, when did you consider yourself recovered? I'm like, every day I'm working on it, and every day I'm committing to that. It's never like I'm done.
It's kind of like a daily battle that you have to fight. You have to choose to recover. You have to choose to get stronger every day. But even if a day or two you slip back a little bit, it's okay.
Yeah.
And then the next day you can get up and fight again. So there's still a lot of way to widen that understanding about how someone who knows nothing about mental health issues can support someone who's going through that. Because sometimes, having to deal with people who don't understand also causes some sort of burden for those who are going through mental health challenges.
Sure.
But another quick question I want to ask is, when it comes to eating disorders, people would always think that it's some sort of like female illness. It has nothing to do with men. but is it true?
I would like to bash that misconception with a big hammer. Absolutely not true. And what we actually see is that, men are, a lot of men will experience disordered eating symptoms. They just go under the radar. And a big reason for that is when we think about it, part and parcel of kind of masculinity standards in our society is kind of this idea that men should be suppressing emotions or showing discipline and toughness. And these are actually, perfectionistic characteristics, emotional suppression are huge risk factors for eating disorders. And when, men say something like, oh, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to restrict my diet, it's almost normalized in gym culture for men, for them to not show that they're struggling, to kind of perform discipline and toughness externally. This is part of the masculinity expectation. So I think a big reason, first of all, that we might miss symptoms of disordered eating and eating disorders in men is because it's normalized and it's packaged in that particular way. And then, because of that lack of conversation about or representation of men with eating disorders, we also have fewer resources and in terms of actual support resources and research targeted toward this population. So a lot of assessment tools for eating disorders will be targeted toward the female experience. A lot of the support resources, people who are even with clinicians may think that, oh, this is probably not an eating disorder, it's probably something else. So we miss these symptoms because the research just doesn't represent what the symptoms could be amongst this population. And I see that changing. There are more people talking about it now, and awareness that these, men can also experience these conditions. And it's not to say that there's no research. There is budding research and it's starting out. So that's encouraging. But I do think that, there still needs to be more conversation and especially representation being had, of lived experience of men starting to recognize these symptoms in themselves so that they can support themselves and other people around them.
Yeah, and also the understanding of bias can still exist in medical diagnosis these days.
Absolutely.
But one more question about eating disorders is that, as someone who has experienced an eating disorder and as someone who has spoken to so many people who are going through eating disorders and mental health challenges stemming from body image,
Yeah.
what would be an effective way to support people who are currently experiencing eating disorders?
Yeah, I have my toolbox ready to share here. I think first and foremost to remind the person that they're first and foremost a person, not their diagnosis. Because I think a lot of times once a diagnosis is disclosed, people will be like, I need to watch them eat to make sure that they're not going to, not eat. And there's a lot of walking on eggshells, I would say, especially. And this is not because it's especially for people who care a lot about the person, will feel like they're responsible for that person's health and responsible for telling the person to maintain their health. But while I think it's important to have that compassionate and care, it's more important for you to slowly kind of remind the person of all the things that make up their life other than their eating habits, their exercising habits, and the diagnosis. So something that was really helpful for me was when I would consistently be like, oh, I can't come out to dinner tonight. I really don't feel good about it. I'm honestly quite nervous and scared. And I would tell this to my closest friends. They would keep telling me that they missed me at social gatherings. They would just be like, come to the next one. That's okay. Come to the next one. And they would just keep saying that. It's like, we missed you at today's gathering. And they would never stop doing that. Even after I had rejected their invitation 20 times over. So I think it's just so important to remind the person that, hey, we don't just see you as your diagnosis now. We still miss you as a friend, as a person. So I think that's the first thing. And then just to kind of elaborate a little bit on that is not to try to solve their problem. I think to encourage the person to go to therapy and seek professional forms of support, that's a role you can take as a friend or a loved one. But then you have to let go of the kind of critical fear mongering, like if you don't eat, you're going to die, or, kind of taking on that teacher role. Leave that to somewhere else, someone else at that point. Support this person as someone who is there to listen, to give space, and validate as a person. So those are my 2 cents. And also, I just wanted to put one more note here about if the person's in critical condition, this is different. So if the person is risking their lives and really emaciated, or showing signs of physical, kind of in critical physical danger, there is a role and responsibility, I understand, from family members to be like, you have to go see a doctor now. And there, that takes a tone of urgency, and that's necessary. But what I'm talking about here is when the person is in like not an acute space of danger, where you're hoping to support this person who might be starting to struggle with disordered eating, or recovering from an eating disorder from the kind of critical physical state. These are my two kind of suggestions for that.
A lot of the time, part of the burden is also how, like, people are going to see me differently if I tell them that I'm going through this problem, and I'm not going to tell them that, I'm suffering from this. One of the reasons why people don't seek help, and that's how these problems, get worse. But now it's time for us to move on to the next segment. And it's Rapid Bias. So in this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions they've got asked at some point in life. And in Steph's case, biased questions that people ask about someone's body or eating disorders. So Steph, are you ready?
I'm so ready. I'm waving my flag of readiness.
Let's go. Now, question 1. You have an eating disorder, but you look normal.
You can't tell whether someone has an eating disorder based on what they look like. That would be my first response. And just to add on to that, it discourages help seeking when we say this, because it communicates that this person needs to look a certain way to look sick enough before they are, supposed to seek help or allowed to seek help.
And next one. You look so healthy.
Wow. Again, you can't tell how healthy a person is based on their physical appearance. And I think to add to that is that when we think about health as represented physically or through physical characteristics, we forget and we miss out all the psychological and emotional facets of health. So we see this a lot in exercising even when we're sick, drinking. No hate to green juices, but drinking things that we don't like to drink, just because they're, promoted as healthy, even though they make us feel kind of sick, or we're like, we actually don't like that. And the subjective feeling of health is equally important, equally, if not more important than just caring about what the physical package is.
Next question. Wow, you eat a lot for a girl.
Well, the idea that men and women should be eating different amounts is a reflection of really toxic gender norms. And it really reflects also the idea that women, the expectation that women should not only be smaller physically, but also kind of emotionally and in presence. So another point there is to also say that it leads to shame for both parties or for people across the gender spectrum, because when women feel ashamed for having a larger appetite, for example, then men are going to feel ashamed if they don't eat enough. There's like an opposite reaction on either end, and so I think when we have these kind of rigid gender norms, it affects everyone along the gender spectrum and their experiences of what they should look like in order to classify or to be characterized as someone of a gender category or in between.
And next one, you're not fat, you're beautiful.
Ugh. So first of all, this perpetuates the idea that they're mutually exclusive, and that you can only be one or the other. And just, I want to say, although I've never been in a kind of a larger body to the point where people would say that I was fat, I experienced this, or I received this comment when I was gaining weight in recovery, when, people would say, "Oh, you're not fat at all. You're beautiful." And I would, and I just wanted to say to them, like, that's really perpetuating and continuing to associate weight gain with negative things, when in fact, this is exactly what I need right now. And plus, you're still exacerbating the stigma surrounding fatness. And in itself, it is a descriptor. It has no meaning of connotation of negative connotations unless we give it to it. Mm-hmm. So that's something I would want to say. And people will then ask, what can I say instead then? If I want to encourage someone who's in recovery. My favorite comment for this would be someone said to me, "You seem so much warmer and so much more energized." And that was beautiful. You're glowing, they said, and that was something that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, yeah. And also the worst is like when you're trying to tell them this is problematic, when they're like, oh, you're not fat, you're beautiful. They're like, oh, come on, chill. I'm just trying to be nice. Like, why? Yeah, so that's the worst. But
it is.
Moving on. Next question. I wish I could be as skinny as you are.
Wow. This one is brings back lots of just blah memories. Blah. Someone said this to me when I was struggling the most, actually, in the depths of the eating disorder. And it was ironic because I remember feeling extremely terrible that day. And what I wanted to say was that, and we discussed this a little bit earlier in the episode, was that what people want is the privileges that comes with being thinner. I.e. its social connotations, not the actual state itself. So I really just wanted to communicate in that moment. You don't wish I was you don't wish to be me right now, actually. You just wish that you could you could reap the rewards, so to speak, of this body shape. I wish I could do that. And I'm here and I'm not even there. I'm here and I'm not even enjoying those privileges because I'm so tired and so exhausted. And that's what I would want to say in that moment.
And finally, if your shoulders get any broader, no one's going to marry you.
And this kind of came from, and this was something I was speaking to with other friends who are also involved in sport that make their bodies change in ways and look kind of out of the margins of what is an acceptable Asian female, so to speak. And a personal experience I have here is that when in recovery, I discovered other forms of movement that I really enjoyed, like weightlifting, because it helped me see my body in a way that was really functional and celebrated those functional aspects of my body. So it was a great move away from associating appearance with kind of internal characteristics. And then I remember feeling so confused getting this comment because I was so proud of what my body could do and was so proud of the place I was getting to. And yet I felt, again, so much shame for someone telling me again that you're not supposed to be this way. And underlying this statement is you're unlovable. You're going to be unlovable if you continue to look this way. And I was like, that doesn't match up with my experience of how I feel, because I feel empowered and I feel great. And you're telling me that this is not the way I should be, that I won't be lovable or marriageable material if I am this way. So there was a lot of conflict and confusion there. And so I think that, this is what it brings up for me when this comment comes up.
It's very triggering when someone is trying to tell you how you should be feeling about yourself. But
right.
Thank you so much for highlighting all these very important questions. And this is one of the most powerful rapid fire segments I've done. Thank you so much, Steph. Now, to wrap up the episode, obviously our conversation overran, just like a lot of the conversations that you conduct over Body Banter. For those who want to follow, the journey, the conversations, the happenings around Body Banter, and also the content that you have been producing so passionately, where can they find you online, Steph?
Thank you, Isabel. And so people can find me at my personal account is @_the mighty munchkin _ a single underscore, because someone did try to impersonate me recently. Not 2 underscores.
That person followed me on my personal IG as well, and then I was like, oh, I thought we were following each other already.
Yeah. So if this account is still alive and well, please make sure that you only find the one with 1 underscore before and after the mighty munchkin.
1 underscore.
1, just 1.
Yeah.
And then you can find Body Banter at Body Banter. On Instagram. Our website is www.bodybanter.com. And so, those are the main places you can look for me.
For those who want to get involved in the work that Body Banter does, how can they help? How can they get involved?
Yeah, so we currently work with 15 to 25-year-olds in our ambassador program, which kind of has a recruitment cycle every 3 months. So that is going to start again in December, actually, of this year. So if you are between that age range, you can get involved in the ambassador program. You can also book us for a workshop at a school or an organization, if that's something that is of interest. And if you want to hear about the types of workshops we deliver, you can send us an email at hello@bodybanter.com so that we can understand your needs and come to you.
Amazing. And finally, Steph, what does it mean to be proudly Asian?
I love this question. What a beautiful way to wrap up. I think for me, it means recognizing and celebrating the background that I come from, the cultural background that I come from, while also incorporating new narratives into my life. So knowing that this is the way that I've been brought up and honoring the communal respect I have for the traditions and the things that my loved ones have given me. And then also being like, I'm going to adapt this. I'm going to bring new things in here, and knowing that that's a natural and process of change and evolution.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us on Proudly Asian, Steph, for sharing your story so generously and all the powerful insights around body image. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Isabel. This was so much fun.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.